what's not part of a skull or anything else, and you can see these pieces.
I see pieces. So was
that's fragment from the bullet.
Will it be very obvious, Bobby's body compared to the other two?
Yes. Of the three, he was the least damaged by fire.
I think it's just hard to look at these and think that he could do that.
That's what makes it such a heinous crime. It's one thing to talk about it and to say, yes, he slashed their throats or he shot Mary in the head, and to say, here's what that looks like, and it's more personal now.
This is True Crime Arizona, Finding Robert Fisher, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.
Herb Greenbeck, Herbgreenbeck.
And what would you say your relation was to Robert?
An acquaintance.
I knew there was quite a bit more to this story than anyone knows so far. The challenge was trying to find out what unseen evidence I could get to, and if anyone who hadn't been interviewed before or spoken out publicly would sit down with me and share new information about Robert.
You've never talked about this publicly to media?
No.
This is your first interview?
Correct.
It's been 22 years. Why now? Why talk to me about it now?
Well, it's the anniversary. We're all looking to try to find him. We all like to see what's going on. I'm sure the family would like some closure.
Would you like closure?
Absolutely, yeah.
You heard about Herb's camping trip with Robert in episode 1, just a couple weeks before the murders and house explosion. But Herb's part in this whole story begins far before that camping trip. He and his wife Lori were friends with Mary and Robert, and their kids friends with Brittany and Bobby. I wanted to know, who was Robert Fisher?
Hi. Hi.
Here's our chickens. Robert made this chicken coop.
Oh, we're still neighbors like that. We have a lot.
I sat with Herb watching Fisher family home movies. Some tapes survived the house fire.
I think that was Mary.
Right there,
yeah,
yeah.
I think so too.
Bring it over here so I can get you in the picture. That thing fades out. Move over this way toward Mom. Keep going a little more. There we go.
Okay, this time, Bob, you got one hand in the air. One hand way high in the air. I'll hold you here, okay? That's how cowboy rides. Ready, Stace?
They're as typical as home videos can be from the 80s and 90s. Birthday parties, pool days, backyard barbecues, Brittany learning to ride a bike.
Let me see you ride it.
Maybe Robert should have watched this before he did it. Maybe he wouldn't have done it. What a shame somebody could go through to do this. I mean, what would drive him to do something like this? It's terrible.
Give me the dynamic between you and Lori and Robert and Mary and how you guys came together in sort of a social, friendly setting.
Well, when our company started growing, Lori needed another employee, so the kids all played together. Lori's younger kids all played together, and it was just time to add an employee, so Mary came on board and would work out of the house. And after probably a year or so, we ended up getting an office across the street, so Mary came. She was kind of our office manager with Lori.
Lori said she and Mary were the Girl Scout moms together for their daughters. It was such a fun time in their lives.
Our girls were great friends, saw each other every day.
Did you get to spend some time with Brittany and Bobby?
Oh yeah, when I came home in the afternoon, they were there playing with the other kids, and this is your typical business at the kitchen table.
Up, Ruger, up. Ruger's a tree climbing dog.
It was interesting watching these home videos with Herb. We saw a lot of similar clips. Robert telling the dog to do tricks, or him watching over the kids. Herb definitely noticed something.
I guarantee you, if you go through all their videos, it's Robert, the kids, the dog, like you said, and it's the yard, it's hunting, and it's that kind of stuff.
What do you feel like it's missing?
Mary.
Good girl.
Maybe things weren't quite as they seemed behind closed doors.
I know that Robert and Mary had some problems. He was definitely controlling, definitely controlling.
You could see that demeanor from Robert in some of the videos.
Look how he's sitting there with his arms crossed, see? That body language.
What do you think it says?
I'm the man, I'm controlling. This is me. He's the only one talking. Ain't nobody else talking. Yeah, obviously the focus was on the kids, not the marriage. Not many pictures here of him and her.
Nobody really knew anything for sure, but there were rumors of affairs or infidelity on both sides.
I do remember we did go to one baseball game together, and it was just pretty benign. We just watched the game, though, nothing that really stood out. It was kind of the first time I really met him. I would hear that they would have arguments and things like any other couple would have. The employees would hear about it, but
Nothing crazy.
no, just absolutely 100% normal.
Because Robert liked control, Herb felt it actually became a problem that Mary came to work for he and Lori. It was her own job without Robert.
Mary was in a tough position that some women and men get themselves into in relationships where they really couldn't move. And I think what Mary was trying to do was become a little more independent. And I think that maybe that was a threat to him, her independence.
Think that he wanted full control?
Yeah.
Our conversation triggered two very specific memories for Herb of things Robert Fisher said and how he acted, things that now are some clear red flags.
I knew one time that when Mary was at work, Robert called her because he left. He left for the weekend to go up north, and he called her to go up north. And she wanted to have someone go with her because she was afraid that he would do something to her. So that's what she told Lori. I know he was very afraid of divorce. He did not want to get a divorce. He did not want to have any marital problems show outside that house.
This is the first time I've ever heard a concrete example of Mary fearing domestic violence from Robert before everything happened. More than just, oh, he might be mad at me. She thought he would do something to her. That's haunting to think about now. Robert loved to go hunting. You would think, no big deal. A lot of people love hunting. But knowing what we all know now, this story from Herb is chilling.
So one time we had a party at the house, and Robert and Mary came over. And my brother-in-law was there, who's a hunter. And Robert said he had some great big hunt that he got, a deer that he got or an elk. And he wanted to show them. So they all went over to the house. It was like right around the block. and he showed them all these pictures. The elk, it was one of the biggest elk on the wall anybody's ever seen. And then he went through all the pictures. And all the pictures were blood. Were slicing, cutting, removing, smiling, holding a knife with blood. And I guess the hunting is all about the hunting and the sport. It's not about the kill. You hide that kind of stuff from all us guys that don't hunt. And so they came back and said, there's something wrong with that guy. And then they told me about the cutting, the blood, how he took more pictures of the ritual of gutting the animal than the animal itself.
Yeah, not normal at all. In talking to both Herb and Detective Heinzelman, it seemed Robert had these odd tendencies that would show with people, depending on the environment he was in or who he wanted to be in front of certain people. But it always changed.
There was no obvious signs to you that he was going to do something of this magnitude.
No. I did understand he was very controlling. I understand his alpha male presence, the way he wanted to be. With other men, he was very timid. He wasn't like, the kind of guy that wants to tell the loudest joke or talk to the guys, hey, how you doing? He was very reserved. It's like almost he didn't get along with the guys that way. He was just more into his own thing, very quiet.
So you think his demeanor is different with women?
Yeah, 100%. He controls women. I think he's the kind of guy that loves that control and probably did his whole life, in every aspect of his life.
I think everybody tries to put themselves in the mindset of Robert Fisher. And between the time that the incident happened, the fire happened, and the time that we found his vehicle. And I think that's what makes this one more interesting is the speculation. And you'll talk to two detectives or two media personalities and say, what do you think happened? And absolutely this happened, or no, absolutely this happened. And he was a rugged outdoorsman who could live off the land. No, he wasn't. He was a weekend warrior who used an ATV, and he liked to fish, but if he was put out in the wilderness, he wouldn't survive. So there's so many different aspects of his personality that we try to kind of put ourselves into to say, okay, this is what I think happened, or this is where I think he is right now. I think based on the audience that he had, he dramatically changed his outward appearance, and he was a family man, a good father, a good husband, went to church to a certain group of people, and then on the other side, no, he was a person who didn't have a happy marriage, who didn't have a happy childhood himself, and all he wanted to do was escape, and all he wanted to do was go hunting and fishing and just get away from his family. So depends on who you talk to is what the impression that you get from him.
Even though Herb went camping with him, he was always weary of Robert.
He would be nobody I would ever hire. He would be nobody I would ever sit at a bar and talk with. He was an oddball. I would consider kind of a, watch that guy, he's crazy.
And life is worth a living just because he lives.
We saw her as a bright and shining star among her peers, such a beautiful young lady, so precious, so unique, so special. She will be missed more than I can say. God must be thrilled to have her right now in his choir in heaven. I love you, Maria. I love you, Brittany. I love you, Bobby.
With Robert still missing, the Scottsdale community held a funeral service for Mary, Brittany, and Bobby.
Heaven is just a breath away.
Incredibly, Mary's father was still giving Robert the benefit of the doubt, even at the funeral, telling the media this.
You want to know about my Robert? He was the greatest dad. He was the greatest husband. I miss him. I miss him terribly. I miss him almost as much as I miss my daughter, because they were one. They did so many things together. I didn't find out all of them, but I got in on many of them, okay? Robert loved the outdoors, and my Mary became an outdoors person because of that. I learned so much about my daughter and my Brittany over the last few days.
There were many tears from friends and classmates of Brittany and Bobby. The church was full of people in a large auditorium room, and for some, it was an opportunity to get to smile about their favorite moments with the kids.
I wanted to start out with a funny little story about Bobby. Goofy was a good word for him. My youngest son, Brock, he was carrier of the Awana flag, and Bobby were good buddies. And Brock invited Bobby to come home with us one Sunday afternoon a couple weeks ago. And they played in the afternoon, and it came time to get them back to church for bell choir. And I said, well, boys, we're in luck. We've got the convertible. And Bobby was just so excited, and he said, we've got to ride with the top down. And I said, okay, you got it. And those two clowns climbed in the back seat, and we came down the 101. And I said, are you guys sure, as we're getting on the freeway, I said, are you sure it's going to be really windy? You know, go, 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 it's okay. And I'm not kidding, the whole way down the 101 until we exited on Thomas, those two had their hands up in the air, they were waving at people, and they laughed the whole way.
Stories like this just hammer home the innocence of these kids. For decades, the loss of both children and Mary has taken an emotional toll on Lori Greenback.
And we loved her and the kids. It's crazy. After all this time out still.
Yeah.
Painful.
That pure innocence is what makes what you're about to hear even more disturbing.
We got just scene photos.
This is from the fire department?
Yeah, so we can do printed scene photos, and then we can go into some of the specifics as far as what we got there. So
Current case detective John Heinzelman invited us back to his office at Scottsdale PD after we did the original interview with him a few months ago. He was going to sit me down and show me all of the crime scene photos. This isn't access we normally get with a case, but it's something I wanted to see. And you're probably thinking, why? Why would you want to see graphic pictures? Investigating this case, I've learned a lot, and I've always known how horrible the crime was. But to get the full scope of just how heinous of an act this was, I wanted to see what truly happened, which made this case so much more personal to me. John and I sat down in a conference room where we laid out printed pictures the fire department had taken that day at the house explosion, and then hundreds more he had on his work laptop.
This is the sheets and the bedding and everything. That's what she was lying on top of. That doesn't get burned, that gets left behind.
We first looked at the charred ruins of the bedrooms, which was the first time I saw parts of the bodies.
This is a bedroom here, so it's not as obvious right from here, but there's a body in there.
Like that's how you know the fire started after, because the body was
that the
there.
person was still there, yeah. So
and
then
that's why it burned around it.
Right. Were they killed and placed in a fire, or were they put in there and then the fire was started afterward? And then we could look from the body, we can determine from autopsy as far as soot and things in the lungs to see if they were alive during the fire or not. That was one of the significant things about this case, is in all three, in Mary, Bobby, and Brittany, none of them had any soot in their lungs. None of them had any evidence that they were inhaling during the fire.
I know you're not able to see the pictures on a podcast, so I'm going to describe as much detail as I can. To give you an idea of how much devastation that explosion did, it was hard to even make out where the beds were inside the rooms at all, and it was hard to tell there were even bodies in the pictures because they were covered in so much debris. I would soon learn these would be the least graphic pictures I'd see.
Each one had damage to their throats that was caused by a knife.
Part of the autopsy and investigation involved a forensic anthropologist who did cervical bone impressions on each body to see how deep the cuts from the knife were, and was able to compare that to an intact skeleton at the office to gain perspective.
Even though the fire took place and did some damage, we can still kind of reenact and recreate what we're seeing here. So we're seeing some of this injuries there.
It showed cuts that not only went through the throat, but went all the way back to the cervical spine. That was close to decapitation.
Absolutely disturbing. So, and again, looking at this and saying, what we're missing is we're missing the rest of the body. We're missing the trachea. We're missing all the tendons and all the ligaments on both sides. This is literally just that spinal column that's on the back. So you're already having to cut through several inches of someone's throat to get to this point to leave that mark, which I think that was a significant part to say how deep these cuts really were.
The next pictures were zipped up body bags. They were labeled with numbers, identification numbers, for Mary, Brittany, and Bobby. Up until this point, I hadn't seen the bodies up close. We started with pictures of Mary, or so we thought.
Oh my God.
It's more burn, more...
Mary has more burn.
Right, so to look at that and to say that's where it was more focused. The fire was more focused on the master bedroom and on her rather than the kids. The kids had injuries, thermal injuries, but not as severe as what this was.
What do you think of looking at those really graphic pictures?
I mean, it's just... I don't know. It's hard to look at. All that we've seen at this point was Mary alive, right? And then to see that, it's just like a completely shocking difference. It's very obvious that she was on her side.
And then the mattress underneath that was still intact, and then you could see where the blood in the mattress was and the blood in the sheets were to show that, okay, there's bleeding, but a person who was just caught in a fire, you wouldn't have that.
I wasn't sure how I was going to react to seeing these pictures. I didn't cry, but going back through the video, my face looks completely pained. They were so hard to look at, and part of that was because the bodies were so damaged by burn and thermal damage, so much so that for a while, we thought we were looking at Mary's body, until John realized some files were mislabeled, and we were actually looking at Brittany. The giveaway was eventually finding an X-ray picture that showed the bullet hole and fragments in Mary's head.
Yeah, I'm going to say that that was Brittany that came
We think
in
that
first.
was Brittany now.
This is a perfect example of the investigation process, right? You see that picture, you don't have all the context for it, but you're like,
It just doesn't it doesn't fit compared to here, where now you can see what's obvious, what's not part of a skull or anything else, and you can see these pieces.
I see pieces. Was
That's fragment from the bullet. My personal recollection was that Mary was found on her back.
I think the hardest part for me was seeing the last body.
Will it be very obvious Bobby's body compared to the other two?
Yes. Of the three, he was the least damaged by fire. I guess we'll say.
Because where his room was?
You know, something that I'm not sure. I'm assuming yes, because that's where it didn't burn.
Oh my God.
But you can see how this is all this is intact. All of his chest, all of his arm, his forearms, where you could tell he was probably lying on his cheek on this side. And that was protected from the fire literally by his body.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it was like other things that had burned hotter.
Parts of his legs were gone from the damage. The rest of his body was still very identifiable. The first pictures of Bobby I saw were in his bedroom. He was face down in the soot, still wearing his briefs in his bed, just a normal 10-year-old boy. It was awful. Seeing all three bodies in the state they were in, the only pictures I had seen that somewhat resembled what we were looking at was pictures of ancient mummies in social studies books from middle school.
My only concept of anything I've ever seen similarly or not is like from history books.
Right.
I think it's just hard to look at these and think that he could do that.
Well, I think that's what makes it such a heinous crime. It's one thing to talk about it and to say, yes, he slashed their throats or he shot Mary in the head, and to say, here's what that looks like. And it's more personal now to look at it and to say, here's how this happened, that you could come up, to your sleeping child and do this.
I think also too what makes this really hard to see is that everybody, including myself, is used to seeing that family portrait. That's our greatest knowledge of Brittany and Bobby and what they look like is from that portrait.
Right.
And you can't even tell they look like that here.
Right.
You can't see their faces, you can't see anything.
Yep. That's exactly right. That's not what was left.
The last pictures in the file were of Mary's 4Runner, the car Robert took, after it was found in the woods near Young. The detectives have long called that car clean and spotless when they found it. Only a few items were inside, including a coffee cup and a couple things in the trunk.
This is all that was left in there. So we had this camp chair, the very, very clean when it's all said and done. So we're looking at this and we're saying, what was his intentions? Did he abandon this car and just leave it there? There's some handwritten directions. Again, was he planning on living in the woods for years? He had a book and a map, some loose change, nothing that you wouldn't have in your car.
No, nothing, yeah. I mean, this tells us, I feel like, absolutely nothing about where he went next or what he did in that car, other than drive it to that location.
Right.
The only other thing found in that car was Robert's baseball cap.
This is the hat that he's wearing in the ATM video when he takes out the money. So that was in the vehicle.
I'm going to ask you a hard question, man.
All right.
You can answer it or not, or be cordial. Were there any mistakes made?
There were challenges in the case, challenges from the beginning, where looking at it and reinvestigating this case, if it happened today, 21 years after it originally happened, I think things would have been different. We would have collected more evidence. We would have been able to preserve more things for more forensic testing. The biggest part about the mystery of this case is that the way it came in, that it was just such out of the blue, and it immediately became a manhunt, or a let's find Robert Fisher as our main focus, as our main suspect, but also as somebody a person of interest that we need to find regardless, because he's in the loose. So I wouldn't go so far as say there were mistakes made. There were limitations at the time, and I think it was an overwhelming thing to walk in and find 3 bodies in a house fire. I wished we'd had a better opportunity to really stay where the vehicle was, really process that area, really do a much more thorough job, but I get the limitations that we had. This was a tip of somebody that was seen up near Roosevelt.
John took us to see the evidence file, which isn't really just a file. It's boxes and boxes and folders of evidence.
I need a bigger office is what I need.
Yeah, I've never seen that before.
The first picture we saw was of a human skull.
This is what came of that one. And it was proven not to be him, but again, it's hikers. Hikers are walking along and they find a rib cage and they find all these bones.
There were so many tips. We just started sifting through them.
Different ones. I'm looking for the one in particular. This again was a tip that we got, that this cabin is located up in the woods near Young, and they thought maybe that Robert Fisher was living there.
So how did you rule this out, that he wasn't there?
Well, all we could do at that point is to say we had no evidence that he was.
So you don't actually know?
Not necessarily, no.
He could have been there?
Sure, absolutely.
Today's forensics, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
You would have tested for DNA inside this?
Yeah, sure. If there were things that we would be able to look at and we could say, yes, that's a good piece. So the mouth of a water bottle, for example, or something where a spoon that looks like it was not washed, it looks like it was used, something that will render DNA.
What if he had just touched that stove, though, for instance? Would that have proven the DNA or given you enough DNA that you would have needed to test it?
What you need is you need skin cells and you need that sloughage from them. So you think of something more rough. So it's not so much touching this. This might be a good fingerprint, but it's rubbing on something, or the collar of a shirt that's rubbing, or a hat that somebody's wearing that you might be able to get DNA on.
So that more cells come off onto it.
Exactly.
Okay, I got it.
So inside of gloves that you're wearing. So.
And then saliva is just the top of the top.
Right.
Some pictures in the file were preserved memories.
The funeral service for Mary and the kids, and the memoriam page that we have here.
I've never seen that. Can you open that back up?
Sure. Either.
So, and everybody, and Pastor Greg, the family friend who gave us thoughts about the case.
That's sad.
Mm-hmm. So that's his dog that was here, and again, even taken from the house to the point where.
Oh, it's burnt. It's just crazy to see that, because that was in the explosion.
Right. Going through all of the stuff, this is one thing I've never really looked at was this particular photograph.
Because we can talk all we want about it and see it in video, but I think to actually see the evidence like this is...
Yes, this makes it real. This turns it into, this was not just an event or something that we're investigating. This was a crime that it brings it home for everybody.
We found his last bank transactions.
His bank activity that came in afterwards, so to show that we didn't, that he
so
didn't have
are
any
those
further.
his last transactions?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know where they were?
I do, because we've had them all looked at.
So where did he go before?
Here's the 280, and some of them are checks that were cleared.
I was going to say, so these two, after the 280, are those things that he deposited or that just
cleared afterward.
Went through? How frustrating is it to look at these pictures knowing this is the last known picture of Robert Fisher?
It's that piece that I wish we had more. You know, you look at this and you say, even that, he's walking away. Could we tell something? Does he have something that I can use?
What was he wearing? What does that say? Something with a C.
Mm-hmm. Well, same kind of thing. RC, like maybe either radio controlled something or that RC Cola.
John pulled out a Reader's Digest from 2001 that featured the case. For full transparency, I was only 8 years old in 2001 when this happened. So my next question made John and Sergio actually laugh out loud.
This is Reader's Digest. Okay. What is that? Is that a magazine?
Oh yeah, you're too young to even know.
I mean, I know the name, but I couldn't tell you what it was.
That hurts. Yes, this was a weekly or monthly magazine that used to come out, just Reader's Digest. They used to have just kind of fluff pieces and then little jokes.
Was this popular?
Oh my God.
Okay.
Oh, you're killing me.
I'm sorry.
Yes, it was very, very popular.
I don't even remember my parents having a Reader's Digest. Anyway, back to the tips. John pulled out a 3-ring binder full of tip sheets. Quite literally, hundreds and hundreds of sheets of paper where people submitted tips, then filled out how sure they were that the person they saw was Robert Fisher. I had never seen this before.
We get lots of tips, but there's not much we can do with. What do you working temp in Albuquerque and some labor, but he used the name Williams. They always do these how sure you are. So I like the 100%, but it's there's no way to follow up on it. Calm white tiger. So that's it.
What?
So, but I'm 100% sure that this is him. And this is in January 2009. Whatever we got from the hotline is what we got. So if we have an email address or something, we can try to reach out to them. But a lot of people will send it in and just send in the information.
Yeah.
And that's the end of it. Here, check this person. You should look at this person, And that's what we end up going with. Like, well, okay, I don't think it's him, but I can't rule him in or out.
Right.
They even had a parapsychologist contact them.
She's a parapsychologist, parapsychological investigator.
What is that?
She's a psychic. In her clairvoyance, what she sees is something going on. So she's in the first photographic, I saw a middle-aged woman. I heard the name Laura or Lorna. And then the video, I found myself standing in front of a cabin-style home with him. So she's seeing Robert and she's seeing his new life and everything else. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to give me. She said, I heard the words Vermont and allergies. So that's what I have. So that's a tip that I have to follow up on.
Nothing ever came of that tip. But there are some that were, and frankly still are, very credible. One of those in South America.
I remember a tip from 2009, and it was tourists that were on vacation, and they were at a convenience store, a little drugstore, bodega, and were taking photographs. They got back home and they looked at their photographs, and in the background of this picture is a white male that looks like Robert Fisher. And that person came up and confronted them and said, give me that camera, don't you take my picture. And that raised some suspicion. Again, they didn't realize why until they got home and started doing a little bit more research, and then said that might be Robert Fisher.
We looked at the pictures. There were 2 of that man in the background.
I think this guy's face is too narrow and his eyes look a little different.
Point at him in that photo, Brianna.
Right here? Even me just looking at it, I don't think that's him. I don't know, Sergio, what do you think?
Hold on. I don't know. It's the eyes and the nose that seem like the most common feature that.
I think these eyes look different though.
They look like him.
I think those eyes look different.
Yeah.
Here's the other one. Look at the other angle here.
Yeah, you see with that hat. Let's see if it's.
See, I say it does look like him.
You think so?
Yeah, it's the nose and the mouth now that kind of resemble.
The nose, I definitely see. For some reason, the eyes are throwing me off.
Here's the thing.
We were never able to determine whether this person was Robert or not.
So was it him? I mean, maybe. We really don't know. Pictures of that bodega tip were next to surveillance pictures of another tip.
Here's the target picture that we were talking about, like him walking through the door. So we can pull these out of the file.
Yeah, we just pull those out for sure.
A couple surveillance pictures of an unknown man walking into an unknown target.
There was a man that went into Target that matched a description of Robert Fisher. And they went to the store and they got the videotape. And then here's the still images of that person in January of 2002 walking through the door. And then we've got that VHS video.
Hard to see. I can see the resemblance.
Right?
I mean, yeah.
That it's a surveillance video, full view of somebody walking through the door. So, and that's all we had. So I didn't have any more to go through.
We still don't know who that man was either. But if Robert Fisher was trying to stay off the grid, do we really think he would be going to a public target? Probably not. There is one big advantage investigators have in this case, though.
Because he was in the Army, we do have his 10-print fingerprint cards and his signature on that, which we're able then to use if we find anything to say, And in particular, you look at that and you say, here, how his R is a specific R, you know, that it's got the big loop on it, that the W and the F have those curls on the front of them. So that would be something that you may keep, and you're not going to change that on your signature. So you're going to keep that. So if we find something like in a cabin with some notes or something written,
you can compare.
We might look for a couple of those letters.
John pulled out a magnifying glass and started teaching me how to read Robert Fisher's fingerprints.
So you line up those millimeter marks, and then that's where you can see. So like, here's a line, but there's a break there. There's a split. There's a split right there.
In the actual lines themselves.
In the ridge detail, that's what you're looking at. So that's good right there. If you look at and you can see the spots, like here's this middle of this delta where there's gaps, there's the lines split, things happen. You can't change that. You can burn it away.
So the littlest details.
Like this one, we will count for this right middle finger, for example, we'll count from this delta to this core, and we'll count the number of ridges that are in between
like a tree
there.
trunk.
Right, exactly. That's why this becomes the critical piece to find Robert, is that he does have his fingerprints. I mean, we've got multiple copies. He's got his classified. These fingerprints are in APHIS, they're in system. So if somebody, a male subject arrested for shoplifting, is picked up, brought in, say, Des Moines, Iowa, and he's fingerprinted, it will match. And it'll come back and say, you don't have Robert Jones, you have Robert Fisher.
Honestly, it was pretty cool learning how to do that. And while machines can read fingerprints too, John says ultimately there is always somebody manually looking at them and matching things up, just like we did. We didn't just use the magnifying glass either. I have an iPhone, and the camera is so good that we could even see the fingerprint detail in pictures and videos too.
Can you believe that we're sitting here talking about a case when cell phones weren't really a thing, and now I'm literally doing like full-on cinematography on my cell phone? I mean, it just puts the whole case kind of into perspective of how much life has changed since this happened.
What I didn't know while looking at Robert's military card is that his signature would play a key role in our investigation, miles and miles away from the Scottsdale Police Department. I took a picture of the military card on my phone, and thank God I did. Before we closed the evidence file and packed up all of our camera gear, Sergio and I wanted to ask John one more question, a question many people have asked me.
Do you consider Robert Fisher a serial killer?
I wouldn't say serial killer. What I would say is the technical term that we use is that family annihilator, where somebody that he's a mass murderer, or he's a multiple murderer.
And some wouldn't stop at mass murderer, but also consider him a sick mastermind. Coming up on True Crime Arizona, Finding Robert Fisher.
Once you pulled up here, I was like, holy shit, I was here, 20 years ago. So these are all the people that have been in the cave since 2000.
Is it plausible Robert Fisher could have survived in this cave?
For more than a week, easy.
This is probably the tightest part yet. We got it now.
True Crime Arizona, the podcast, is hosted by me, Brianna Whitney, and produced by Sergio Hernandez. This episode edited by Vanessa Lickvar. It's a production of Arizona's Family, 3TV, CBS 5, and azfamily.com in Phoenix, Arizona.